Hi, I'm Kesenya from Guiding Star with Kesenya. Thanks so much for joining me for this special series all about Saturn and his transits through each of the houses in the horoscope. Some of you might be familiar with a video I've done in the past all about Saturn and his transit through the sign of Aquarius and where that's going to fall for each sign. This video series may be a little similar to that. We might cover similar topics of information. But there will also be more depth in this series, so I thank you for joining me for this ongoing series throughout this autumn. Can I also just say I would be so honoured if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and support the work that I do here in growing the knowledge of astrology throughout Australia and the world. So what is Saturn, first of all? Saturn is the seventh planet out from the Sun, when we include the Sun in this counting astrologically. Saturn is also the last of the visible planets that we can see with the naked eye in the sky at night. Beyond Saturn, to see Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, we need a telescope. And so it's considered in ancient astrology that Saturn is the planet that actually correlate, the final frontier, if you like, that correlates to our visible earthly reality, the manifested reality on planet Earth in this incarnation. Beyond that, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto all have correlations to our inner self, our psyche, our past lives, our wounds, our personal issues, and the way we think about things and the way we integrate things into our lives. So they are very psychological energies, whereas up until Saturn, we have both psychological things happening from those planets, but also material manifestation happening from the planets that we can see. It's an old Hermetic principle, which is called as above, so below, as without, so within. What we see in the sky above us is reflected in our reality on the earth. And the old principle taken further is also what is going on energetically within our soul and our psyche is also reflected on the outer in our earthly life as well. So Saturn, being the furthest planet out as a material planet, as a planet of manifestation, governs most strongly what happens on planet Earth, and for our individual journeys as well. And the reason that is that the further out you go with the planets, the more impact that they have on our lives here on Earth. That might seem a little bit odd. We might ordinarily think that the closer the planet, the greater impact it would have on us. Therefore, Venus should be the most impactful planet of all. But that's not the case in astrology, and it's to do with the time and the speed of a particular planet. With Saturn, its movement is so slow that the energy has time to build and therefore really pack a punch. Where Venus, or the moon if you want, for example, as well, they whiz around the astrological chart very quickly. The moon goes around in 1 month. Venus goes around in approximately, give or take, a year, depending on whether she goes retrograde or not. But Saturn takes 30 years to do a cycle of the astrological chart. And therefore, the energy has a lot of time to accumulate in one spot. And therefore, we feel the impact most strongly. Saturn, as with all planets, has things that it rules, things that it governs in this earthly reality that we experience. Saturn rules over structures, organizations, hierarchies, governments, regulations and rules. Saturn is also known as Father Time. He governs time here on planet Earth. There are some realms where time doesn't matter. Time is immaterial. But here on planet Earth, we are governed by time as a spirit being manifested into human material form. We are governed by time, and Saturn is the master of time. Saturn also represents things like responsibility, duty, hard work, maturity, perseverance, and endurance in life. These are all actually really great things, and we tend to receive the blessing of these Saturn positive qualities when we start getting into our mid to late 30s. That's when Saturn matures in Vedic astrology, he reaches his maturation. And when he reaches his maturation, essentially, we learn how to carry our burdens in life. And everyone at some point needs to learn that lesson. Certainly by the age of 35, 36, when Saturn matures, we step into our full adulthood. We're no longer young adults, we're no longer children, we have fully reached maturity, and hopefully, if we're manifesting at a high level, we've learned how to carry our burdens. Saturn represents structures, as I said, but also traditions. He is the master of the legacy we want to leave behind as well. He has a connection with the 10th house in astrology, which is all about legacy that we want to leave for those who come after us. He also has a connection to authority figures and those in authority over us. Saturn, on the more negative side of his energy, rules restriction and blockage, fear, holding things back, keeping things from us, and starving us of the things we like, but also equally starving us of the negative things in life if he is making a particular aspect in our natal chart. In astrology, Saturn is the ruler of two signs traditionally. The sign of Capricorn mainly, and then in traditional astrology, the sign of Aquarius. In modern astrology, Uranus is considered to be the ruler of the sign of Aquarius. But in traditional astrology, Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. In archetypal astrology, Saturn is seen as the boss figure, the CEO. Because I like things to be a bit lighter and a bit more fun, I kind of envisage Saturn as kind of the head of control in the Get Smart series. If you're familiar with the Chief, he's managing all these bumbling idiots all around him trying to catch the bad guys. And here is the Chief just trying to keep everything under control, managed, well organized, well structured, and adhering to what needs to happen and the rules and principles of control in the series Get Smart. But he's still likable. A lot of people will paint Saturn to be the boogeyman of the horoscope. He's out to get you. He makes life tough. He's negative. And certainly some streams of astrology see him as the great malefic. I kind of liken him instead to the great father figure in the sky. If you imagine a father who's, his daughter or son is 16 and they're about to go out to a party, and dad, the father figure, is sitting there, and as they run out the front door and says, "Hang on, what time are you going to be home? Where are you going? I want the phone number of the place where you're going to be. Are there going to be any other adults at the party? You've got to do things properly, by the book. There's no being silly, and I want you home by 10 o'clock. And the children are like, "Oh, Dad." But Dad's strict and firm and doesn't budge an inch. He sets boundaries. He says, "No way, home by 10 o'clock. You're not going to be one of those children who's out running around the streets at all hours of the night, getting up to no good." So he is this protector, father figure energy, authority figure energy in the horoscope. Now, sometimes we see people manifesting Saturn in a very negative way. They are the authority figure with abuse and violence and control. Now, often that would indicate a connection with Mars in a chart if that's how it was playing out. But then there are other people who manifest beautiful Saturn energy that's benevolent. That is, lots of boundaries, lots of regulations and rules, but it's for your greater good. It's for your upliftment. It's for the betterment of yourself, society, humanity, whatever. So there are many ways Saturn can manifest, but he is always the energy of this protector father figure. Even in karmic astrology, Saturn represents our fears that we have from previous incarnations. For example, if you happen to fall off, and many people who've had readings with me will have heard this analogy, if you happen to in a past life fall off the Grand Canyon to plummet to your death, and then you reincarnate and you've got this fear of heights you can't explain, that's Saturn putting protective boundaries of fear in place so that you don't go and fall off the Grand Canyon again and plummet to your death in the next life. So he is very much about our psychic protection or karmic protection, and sometimes people see him as a representation of karmic blockage, based on the hurts and the wounds and the fears we've experienced in past incarnations. According to the reading I've done, Saturn rules the gemstone qualities of obsidian, also tourmaline and hematite, the heavy black stones that are, in the case of tourmaline especially, particularly good at absorbing energy. Saturn also correlates to the color brown, which is why for this series I'm dressing in very autumnal tones of brown. And as a ruler of the earth sign of Capricorn, Saturn is a very earthy type of planet, and it has a lot of earth energy about him. And so one of the remedies that we can offer for any Saturn troubled times is to be in nature or to walk barefoot on the earth. Saturn also rules rocks and gravelly soil and rocky places. Isolated places do come under Saturn's governance occasionally as well. So to be in those places is actually to be in a Saturnian environment, or to live in a garden full of rocks or a house that's made of stone is a very Saturnian environment to live in. Saturn also governs things like minimalism and restraint and restriction. If we were to have Saturn sitting permanently in our first house, then we might find that our body was restricted in some way, either through our size is restricted, or our height. So either our outward expression or our upward expression would be restricted. Saturn would be affecting our body in that way. So he rules restriction and restraint. So that's a little, in a nutshell, picture of what Saturn as a planet represents. Now we're going to dive into what it means to have Saturn transiting through the houses. But first, let's start with an explanation of how to assess where Saturn is according to whole sign astrology by transit. So how do we find out if we are currently having a Saturn transit to our 7th house, and therefore this video being relevant? Well, we really need to know where Saturn is currently transiting in the sky first of all. So you could go to an app like planetwatcher.com or astro.com, something similar to that, and you would then find out where Saturn currently is in the sky, what constellation it is traveling through. At the moment, as I'm recording this, we've got Saturn just having moved into the sign of Aquarius. So I'm going to use that as an illustration. But you can look, in a few years' time, Saturn's going to be in Pisces, and then a few years after that, Aries, and so on. So do make sure you check where Saturn is. And based on wherever Saturn sits, transiting through the sky, that is going to give you the information you need to discern what house, in whole sign astrology, that's the system I'm using, what house Saturn happens to be transiting through for you. So basically, you look at your ascendant. In this example, let's make Leo our ascendant. There's Leo rising on the horizon. And we count to wherever Saturn happens to be from our ascendant rising sign. And that will then tell us how many houses away Saturn is, and therefore you can look at the appropriate video for you. In this one, we're looking at the 7th house. So 1 house, 2 houses, 3 houses, 4 houses, 5, 6, and 7 houses is where Saturn currently is transiting if you are Leo rising. So that makes it your 7th house. Now, if in a couple of years' time you're watching this video and Saturn happens to be in, let's say, the sign of Aries, well, it's going to be a different rising sign, obviously, that puts Aries in the 7th house. In that case, you would be Libra rising, which would see Saturn falling in the sign of Aries, the 7th house. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 signs from the sign of Libra rising. That's how it will work in a few years' time. And they'll be having a transit to their 7th house by Saturn. But let's go back to what we're currently experiencing in the sky. And that's why if you look at planetwatcher.com or astro.com or one of those particular apps, you can figure out where Saturn is, and then you can calculate what house he's transiting through. If you're Leo right now, he's transiting through your 7th house. What does this mean? Well, the 7th house is our committed partnerships where we sign a contract to be involved in them, a marriage contract, a business partnership. We might even have a contract with a client or some sort of a contract to reach an audience of some sort. Other people are seen from the 7th house. So our relationships with other people, particularly our contractual relationships with other people, are going to be affected by this transit more than anything. This is also a house of refinement, and it has associations to the sign of Libra, sophistication. Business partnerships are also seen, as I mentioned, from this placement as well. And the 7th house rules other things like legal proceedings, any contractual arrangements, any types of diplomatic affairs and peacemaking, peacekeeping actions, those sorts of things. So when we're in the 7th house, we're looking at all these things. Now, I just need to point out, for those who aren't aware, how we assess a committed life partnership in astrology, a 7th house relationship. Is obviously a contractual agreement like a marriage certificate being signed by two lovers, two people who agree to spend their life together. You don't have to be in love to get married, do you? But there are some other contractual agreements that can also signify a contractual committed relationship, as opposed to a 5th house relationship, which is all about love and dating and romance and all the fun stuff. This is like getting down to the nitty gritty, the serious stuff, the hard yakka of doing life together as a couple is more what we see from the 7th house. So these other committed type partnerships can be seen when you actually purchase a house with your partner. You don't have to be married, but if you're in love with someone and you buy a house together and you both sign the mortgage contract or whatever, then you're in a committed partnership with this person. A bank account, if you open a bank account with your lover, committed partnership. Any type of contract you sign with your lover is seen as a 7th house agreement and arrangement. So, bank account, buying a car together, buying a house together, marriage certificate, those sorts of things. We also see a 7th house committed life partnership in terms of a sort of love relationship or committed romantic type relationship being when we have children together. Now that means children who are actually born and children who we don't actually ever get to meet or interact with, such as abortions, miscarriages, things like that. If you have one of those with somebody, then you actually have had a committed life partnership. So, I mean, if you had a one night stand when you were 21, you got pregnant, you miscarried, and you never saw the person again, you've actually had a committed life partnership, and you'd be looking for other positions in the chart for your next marriage or committed life partnership as seen through the lens of astrology. But that's a whole other topic, which we don't need to go into a great deal of for now. Suffice to say, the 7th house is about committed partnerships and diplomatic relations, business partnerships, etc. So, of course, when Saturn goes into this house, we're going to take responsibility for all these things in our life, responsibility for our love lives, responsibility for our relationships, responsibility for our business partnerships. For the next 2.5 to 3 years of this transit, this is going to be your most important area of life growth. So focus your energy on these things, relationships, because that is where you're going to evolve and grow and blossom from most of all over the next 3 years. And the universe is going to give you opportunities to experience these things, to learn from relationships in hard ways and in blessed ways as well while Saturn is here. And I say blessed ways because Saturn is in his greatest directional strength in the 7th house. He is right at home in the 7th house. He's exalted in the sign of Libra, which connects to the 7th house. So there's similarities there. But Saturn is like he's sitting on the couch, he's putting his feet up, his hands behind his head, and he's relaxing. He's happy there in the 7th house. And so this is a beneficial transit for us to learn to grow, to evolve, and to become higher vibrating beings through the nature of what this transit will bring us. But it is full of lessons, as with every Saturn transit. The lessons are here for us to learn, and we're going to be learning lessons in compromise, lessons in understanding the needs of our heart, what we really want in love, what we really want in commitment, what we really want in relationship. And if we're not being true to our heart, then the lessons may just be quite hard to learn. For example, if we have been inappropriate in relationships, if we've been abusive in relationships, if we've been harsh and condescending, if we've been cheating and sneaking around in relationships, let me tell you, Saturn moving through your 7th house is going to call you to account, make you toe the line, make you follow the rules, make you actually upgrade the level of how you're doing things regarding relationships. So you won't be able to get away with what you've been getting away with in the past if that's been your approach to relationships, where you've come at things from a point of selfishness, come at things from a point of indulgence or at the expense of others. You're not going to get away with that anymore when Saturn moves through the 7th house. The old adage from the Bible, be sure your sins will find you out, is actually going to come home to roost for you when Saturn is transiting your 7th house. So do make sure as you approach this transit that all your actions with regard to relationships are above board. Not only that, but any blockages you might be having in love and your attitude to relationships, your attitude to connected partnerships and committed partnerships, any blockages there, they're going to be revealed. They're going to be shown to you over the next 2.5 to 3 years. This is not a bad thing. This gives you the chance to improve. This gives you the chance to restructure, reorganize, and recreate your approach and your attitude to love and commitment and relationships. Saturn is a very realistic planet, very objective. It doesn't sort of spend time off in fantasy land at all. So you're going to become more objective and realistic about relationships, yes, but especially about where you fall short in relationships. And that's, during this transit, it's not going to hurt you so much or offend you so much to be told, oh, you know what, you really, when you say that to me and you express your criticism of me, it really strikes me, deep in the heart, and I don't like it. Can you try and act with more love? If someone points out that sort of thing to you during this transit, you'll be responsive because you're not going to be off in Fantasyland or heavily involved in the depth of emotion when Saturn transits here. You're going to be objective, you're going to be realistic, you're going to be practical about matters of the heart. So if someone points out, you're too critical of me or you hurt my feelings or whatever, you're going to be like, okay, let's, how can I work on that? All right, well, I'll try hard not to. And, pull me up again if I say something that's offensive, and I'll take note and try and make amends. We're going to be practical. We're going to be hardworking. We're going to be honest and objective about our foibles in relationships. We're also going to be willing to improve. Saturn is not, well, it can have connections to perfectionism. It's really more the realm of Virgo that we see that being the case, or the 6th house. But we're wanting to balance things in the 7th house here. The 7th house is about balance and harmony. And so Saturn being here says, I'm willing to balance things. I'm willing to create more harmony. I'm willing to work hard to bring those things into our relationship now. This is a transit where we might find that we have more responsibility for our partner and we take on more responsibility to our partner, such as what I've just expressed. We take on the responsibility of working on the relationship, of harmonizing it, of balancing it, of making it fairer, equal, and more a blessing for both parties now. But we can become responsible, a lot more responsible for our partner. So we might have need during this transit to be the breadwinner while our partner takes a break and does some study. We might have need now to be the one who works harder at this time because maybe our partner's not well, or maybe our partner has to take some time off work for one reason or another. So we need to face up to our responsibilities as a committed partner. And this goes for business partnerships as well. For example, your business partner mightn't be able to participate in the business for family reasons. And so you have to take on your extra share of the work to help your business partner out. And so we can see that there's a lot more hard work and responsibility and duties required for our partner's sake when Saturn transits the 7th house. This is also potentially a time for committing to your loved one. Maybe you've been dating for years or living together, and there's been no formal commitment between you, but when Saturn transits your 7th house, suddenly you get the urge. You know what? I never thought I'd want to get married, but actually I'd like to marry you, or I think we need to formalize our relationship and let's go buy a house together, or something like that, where you will actually feel the impetus to commit to your partner in a more solid manner than maybe you have been. Now also, because we are learning through relationships during this transit, it is also a transit when we might find that we will be ending relationships as well. I want to quantify this though. When we are ending relationships because of a Saturn transit through the 7th house, it's because we come to a realistic view of that relationship and its potential for the future. And we realize this is not for me. This relationship I thought was going to be the love of my life, but reality strikes and you know what? They're just not for me. My needs are not being fulfilled. I don't feel I can give any more to this relationship than what I have. So it comes to a natural conclusion through a mature, Saturn is maturity, a mature assessment of the relationship and its practical capacity to work for the long-term future. Saturn is long-term. Saturn looks to the extended period, not just in the here and now. Saturn is long-term. And so we are looking at our relationships through that lens. Can this relationship endure for the long term? Is this going to satisfy me for the long term? And if the answer is no to those things, then you'll find the relationship will come to its natural conclusion. Now, obviously there are people in life, and I've been one of these people on occasion, who just get tumbleweeds in regard to relationships. There is nothing on the horizon, no love, no cuddles, no affection. That happens. It's a season of life when that can occur. Sometimes the season is very long. Even if we're in relationship, we can get tumbleweeds. Suddenly our partner has to move to Australia and we're in Europe, and the tumbleweeds for 2.5 years, no cuddles, no kisses, no affection, no relationship as we thought we wanted to experience it is happening. And so when that occurs, we feel like there's nothing, and that can actually make us feel lonely. If we're single, and I'll talk a little bit more about if we're single with this transit in just a minute, but if we're single, obviously, and that means being physically by ourselves, even if we've got a partner in another country, as well as singleness, it can feel very lonely during this transit when nothing is happening love-wise and relationship-wise. But again, we need to remember the lessons of Saturn, because this is going to be our biggest learning opportunity. That feeling of loneliness is actually a catalyst for us to learn more about ourselves, to learn more about how we view love, what our ideas of relationship are, what our needs of the heart are. So see this through the lens of, what can I learn? How can I grow from this? And also remember what Saturn represents. Take responsibility for your relationship. So when Saturn is transiting here and you're feeling the tumbleweeds just rolling by, there's nothing going on, you're in a sort of a ghost town, or and you're feeling lonely, then remember, I'm going to take responsibility for my loneliness. And maybe, okay, I might be by myself, but I'm going to go and join that sewing group that I really love, or I'm going to go and join that sporting club that I've always wanted to be a part of, because then I'll be able to mingle with people who like the same things as me. We might be able to experience some friendship and connection that I'm perhaps missing through my feeling of loneliness right now. So take responsibility for your state of being, and you will learn so much during this transit if you do that. Now, if you're single, what Saturn can bring you is actually to a point over the next 2.5 to 3 years when you actually enter into the most committed and serious relationship of your life. Remember, Saturn is in his greatest directional strength here. So some schools of astrology would say that the energy of the 7th house is being blocked by Saturn being there. But the school of astrology I refer to says that if you take responsibility for your relationship condition, then Saturn can bring you the blessing of this placement. A lot of the time it might depend on what sign he's transiting through and the dignity of Saturn in that sign. Certainly for Leo people, where Saturn is transiting through a sign that he rules, the potential, if you're single, to meet somebody is greatly increased. Somebody who you will want to commit to, someone who you might want to start a business with and create a business partnership with. These sorts of things can come your way when Saturn is in good dignity, transiting through, in this case, his own sign in the 7th house. Saturn can do his best work in the 7th house because he is all about, as we've already discussed, maturity, commitment, duty, responsibility, hard work. And these are practical, helpful attributes that we use in relationships to make them last, to make them endure, to make them actually feel safe and secure and steady, which is kind of what we want when we decide to commit to somebody. So Saturn is a blessing when he moves through here. Now, as I said, with this transit, we have much more realistic expectations of relationships now. We are no longer sort of expecting Prince Charming to ride up on his white horse and carry us off to his castle in the clouds, as one of my old Disney records used to say when I was a little girl. Now we're objective. We know what relationships about. We realize that it's not going to be the fantasy land, and we come to a point where we accept, okay, there's got to be some compromise. This is the house of compromise. Okay, we've got to, excuse me, we have to be diplomatic here, and we have to allow for people's struggles and foibles and my struggles and foibles, and we have to work relationship around those things. And when we're realistic, then we can, and accepting, I should also add, then we can actually make a relationship really work beautifully. This is a transit when we can find that our partnerships in life become the catalyst for a very deep-seated transformation in us. And what I mean by that is Saturn is a massively karmic planet. He actually is all about our karmic failures in the past, or mistakes that we've made in the past, and the fears that now result in our heart because of those things we've experienced in a previous incarnation. So when he's transiting through the 7th house, we can have these very deep realizations of our attitudes and beliefs that come from, we mightn't realize it, but that are coming from our karmic past, our karmic relationship mistakes in the past lives. And we can sort of expose those now, reveal those now, and work to overcome those now during this transit. So if you find some sort of some niggles come up for you around relationships, I mean, let's say I've got massive Saturn karma with relationships. Let's say you have a fear of being in relationship and how you will stand the chance of getting hurt and wounded by being in relationship. Let's say that's a fear for you and it holds you back from connecting with others. Then maybe it's a time for getting some professional help around those sorts of things. Maybe it's a time now with Saturn transiting through here for actually doing your own therapy and addressing those fears, those hurts, those wounds that are very karmic. But you've got to expose them and reveal them in order to address them. If you don't know they're there, if you keep denying them, if you keep pretending that they don't exist and blaming everyone else, and you're the victim and everyone else is hurting you, if that is what's going on, then you miss the lesson. So I'd encourage you, if you're experiencing this transit and you have troubles in relationship in any capacity, whether you're married and you have troubles, or dating life you have troubles, or you just have an attitude, you're single and you have troubles with relationship and entering into relationship, look at your fears in that realm. Look at your attitudes and beliefs in that realm. Do the karmic work to heal those karmic hiccups and mistakes and move beyond them with love now. In association with that, we can find that we enter into relationships, and this can be, any type of relationship really. It doesn't have to be a loved one, but we find ourselves entering into karmic relationships now. And you might find that people come into your life and they just feel so familiar, like I've known you before. You're so real to me. I feel like I'm coming home when I'm with you. that is very much the nature of a Saturn karmic relationship, where you just recognize one another from past incarnations. So these sorts of relationships, friendships, and so forth can come into your life now, and you might experience those, even if you don't know that it is a past life karmic experience. They may very well be happening for you for the next 2.5 to 3 years. We can also have more relationships now with older and authoritarian type people. So you might, if you're single, you might enter into a relationship with a man or a woman who's heaps older than you, or that has a high position of authority, or has some sort of strong influence over you in some way. Those Saturnian, very authoritarian, very maybe traditional partners as well, partners who are into old stuff, old things, old sort of styles of doing relationship, traditional styles and attitudes towards relationship. So you can be with a partner who's very much that way inclined as well. So very Saturnian in their nature, relationships with Saturnian style people. We can be in relationship with mature people, responsible people, dutiful people, or we can be in relationships with people who want a bit of control over us, or want to block us and stop us from doing what we want to do, or they're very restrictive, or they're very critical. So this can be, it depends on the shadow side of Saturn showing or the light side of Saturn showing in this relationship. And hopefully you go for the more high vibrating light side rather than the critical person, rather than the person who's blocking you and restricting you and down on you and so on. Go for the light side. Go for people who are mature and responsible and all those good Saturn qualities. Now, what's really interesting is that during this transit of the next 2.5 to 3 years, at some point, Saturn is going to cross your descendant manifestation point. And when he crosses the descendant manifestation point, you're going to shift. There'll be a shift in your life, and it'll be different for everyone, so I can't go into when that's going to be for all of you. You need to look at your chart, follow along with where Saturn is each week, each month or whatever, and when he moves across your descendant manifestation point degree, which could be any of the 30 degrees of this sign, when he moves across that, it represents Saturn moving into the public sphere. What's going on here is Saturn is leaving these lower houses, the 6 lower houses, which are all about restructuring ourselves, redefining ourselves when he transits all these 6 houses, coming to terms with who we are and understanding ourselves, maturing our own personal being. And then he moves into the public sphere, which is above the horizon line. He moves into the public sphere where he's going to spend the next 14, 15 years or so. And he's about to start moving towards new career goals, new career aspirations, creating a new life for ourselves. When Saturn moved across my descendant quite a number of years ago now, what happened was I suddenly discovered astrology, and I began to look deeply into it. And that was the beginning for me of a growth into my career path, my career trajectory. So we begin that move now in little baby steps into what is going to be our public life, our worldly recognition, our worldly achievements. We begin the climb now towards the 10th house, which is our, as I've just said, our worldly achievements and the legacy we want to leave and what we want to be known for and recognized for. So this is an exciting phase. You mightn't even know that it's starting. I certainly had no idea when this transit occurred for me across my descendant that I was beginning on a trajectory towards something so magnificent that I absolutely love. And it's been such a blessing, such a fabulous path of growth. And that's coming from someone with a very debilitated Saturn in their chart. So it doesn't matter who you are, this is going to be a transit of growth and the beginning of, baby steps towards a whole new state of being in the public sphere of life. No longer in your personal self-growth phase, you're in that I'm putting myself out there now. And that's going to begin and happen very slowly over time, as is the nature of Saturn. So once this transit of the 7th house is over, what are you going to get? Well, you're going to understand love and relationships and partnerships. You're going to understand diplomacy and balance and harmony so much better. You're going to be at a greater vibrational level now with your relationships once this is over. But there's some lessons to learn, some growth to go through during the next 2.5 to 3 years. But once it's over, you're in a whole new place. And what you put up with before in relationships, you won't put up with again. You're free of that stuff now. And you're going to be in a place of refreshment with relationships once this transit is over. Basically, this transit represents a catharsis of feelings around relationships. And so if you're feeling undeserving in love, feeling unworthy in relationships, this is going to be changed and transformed and renewed. And I cannot tell you just how much that happened for me when I had Saturn transiting through, finishing up his transit through the 7th house in my life. It wasn't long into my 8th house transit, barely into my 8th house transit of Saturn, that I ended up getting divorced. But it was a result of all the influences of this period, the 3 years that had gone before, realizing, oh, hang on a minute, I've matured beyond this relationship now. I've grown out of this relationship. Now I can't go back to being the person that I was before, because I have evolved with relationships. I have grown with relationships, and I need to move on. So I'm not saying you're about to head into divorce territory. That was just my experience. But you're going to mature with relationships, and you will no longer feel undeserving and unworthy if you do the work on maturely approaching your attitudes and beliefs around love, your love style, what your expectations are. You're going to become more realistic about what you deserve as a person, what you are worthy of as a person as well, which is a blessing, an absolute blessing. So let's take a look at the Vedic or Hindu system of analysis for this. Now, as I have said in all my previous videos, you can take or leave whichever suits you. I've just described the Western approach, and that's incorporated a couple of ancient techniques as well. But now we're going to look at Vedic astrology for Saturn in the 7th house. So when Saturn is in the 7th house in the Hindu system, he is aspecting the 7th house. He's also aspecting the 1st house. He's aspecting the 4th house. And he's aspecting the 9th house as well. So all of these areas of the chart are going to receive, according to Hindu, the malefic influence of Saturn. So that can look like feeling restricted and blocked in relationships, feeling like something's being held back. Even if you are in a relationship, it might feel like things are not flowing as smoothly for you as they usually would, because Saturn is this malefic planet that restricts and blocks and holds back wherever it goes. So that can be the feeling that you will get with this transit. Even if you're in a loving relationship, it can feel like something's not quite flowing as easily as it should be. The aspect to the 1st house with Saturn, Saturn aspecting the 1st house can bring a feeling of restriction in your personal life. It can feel there's trouble progressing, there's trouble receiving recognition for what you're doing, receiving the accolades that you feel you deserve, receiving the momentum to move ahead, and you might feel like you're stuck and you're spinning your wheels in the mud. Because of Saturn's influence, on the 1st house. Saturn's aspect to the 4th house can indicate blockage and restriction with property, with land, like you're trying to sell your house and just won't sell, or you want to buy a home but you just can't find the property that's right for you. There seems to be blockage there seems to be restriction there. Same goes for the maternal line. There might be some blockage or restriction around your relationship with your maternal line, or the line of the nurturing parent. There might be some distance between you and your mother, or there might be a pulling away from the mother in some way where it's restricted or blocked, and you're just not seeing eye to eye with the mother or the maternal line at this time. There can also be some restrictions and blockages around home as well. So under this Vedic influence, you might need to sort of just double check whether things need renovating, whether there's something that needs to be restructured in your home environment. You might also find that, again, as I said, looking for a home can be very difficult at this time, and you might just be tearing your hair out trying to find the home that feels right for you. The other thing that we see in the Hindu is the aspect to the ninth house, and this can indicate difficulties in travel. So, you're trying to go overseas and there's restriction and blockage in that. You go overseas and there might be difficulties in coming home. You can't enter your home country for some reason or another. Or there's hiccups with traveling. You're trying to travel for whatever reason, and it's just not gelling, it's not coming together. You get to the airport in this happened to me. You get to the airport in Bucharest and discover that they won't accept your credit card for the car hire that you had, and so you've got to make other arrangements, and you're just like banging your head against a brick wall with, what am I going to do? When Saturn's aspecting the ninth house of travel, and I have to say he wasn't aspecting the ninth house of travel when I had this experience. So there were other reasons behind that. But there can also be difficulties with other cultures, as I've just described, and also difficulties with gurus and inspirational figures where you're just at odds with them, or you're critical of them, or they're critical of you, and the ordinarily good relationship you might have with someone who's an inspiration to you might suffer under the influence of Saturn aspecting the ninth house. So that's a brief look at the Hindu perspective on this transit. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. I hope it was helpful for you if you are experiencing Saturn's transit to the 7th house. Leave your insights and comments below so that we can all learn from them and understand how it affects us all. May you be blessed, and I look forward to joining you with another video on Saturn's transit through the 8th house next week.